Hello? Nice to meet you. Today's video is now the 25th video. So far, the order in which I've uploaded videos has been to start from the early stages when parents might suspect their child shows signs of developmental disabilities. And then, as the child grows older, I've been posting content in the order of what's needed at each stage. If you look at the 13th episode of the BoTV videos, there's an illustration I shared when explaining the blueprint for a happy life. And up until now, I've been uploading videos based on the contents of that illustration over the course of 24 episodes. The first part is about the 3 foundational bases, where I talked about perspectives, mindset, and attitudes when dealing with children with disabilities. In other words, the perspective is to acknowledge your child's disability in a healthy way. The mindset is not to let your child's disability make you unhappy. And the attitude is to approach things as part of long-term everyday life, rather than focusing only on short-term treatment. In the second part, I talked about 5 directions, and the first is to ask yourself, why? By doing so, keep observing with continuous, caring attention. Second, help your child experience fun and happiness. Third, aim to build relationships with others. Fourth, prioritize and support your child accordingly. Fifth, I mentioned that you should seek help from those around you, including government support, and cooperate with other families. And in the subsequent videos, I first gave an overall explanation of various types of Canadian government support related to the 5th point, and then went into detail about the government support needed up to age 18. Starting today, over the course of several episodes, I would like to share our family's experiences of raising our child according to these guiding principles. What we are about to share is not necessarily the right way, nor is it something that can be applied to every family. That's because every family and every child's situation is different. However, by sharing our experiences, we hope that if any families agree with our approach, they might find it helpful to raise their children with similar principles. Once again, we want to emphasize that what we are sharing does not apply to all families and children, and we hope there will be no misunderstandings. The thing we paid the most attention to while raising our child was social skills and relationships. To support that, we felt it was important to create an environment where our child could interact as much as possible with typically developing children. If your child has difficulty interacting with other children, I think the most important thing for us as parents is to focus on what we can do to help our child be able to get along with others. So for today's discussion, I have invited a guest. Although I have my own experiences, when our child was of kindergarten age in Korea, I also had to work, so I didn't have much free time. As a result, my wife was mainly responsible for our child's education. So she actually has much more experience and knowledge than I do. In addition, after studying early childhood education here in Canada, my wife has worked as a kindergarten teacher for the past 5 years since 2019. And for about 10 years, she has also supported children with developmental disabilities at church. So today, I would like to share my wife's experience and wisdom with you. All right, let me invite our guest. Welcome.
Hello.
Yes, nice to meet you. We didn't have a microphone prepared, so we made a handheld mic. First, could you briefly share your child's experience from about age 3 to 6?
Yes. Our child was diagnosed at the age of 3. And from age 3 to 3.5, we participated in the attachment program that was recommended by the place where we received the diagnosis. Then, starting from 3.5, we joined a program run by the Milal Research Institute. At the Milal Research Institute, at first, my child received education there for about 6 months. But after that, they thought it would be better for integration. So they introduced us to a regular kindergarten and helped us with the transition to an integrated setting. For about a year, a teacher from the Milal Research Institute supported my child in a 1-to-3 ratio. And then for the following year, they said it would be fine for my child to be integrated independently at the kindergarten. So my child spent another year there without a support teacher.
Then, is there anything you think you did well or are glad about while raising your child during that time?
First of all, through the MOA attachment program that we did. After my child was first diagnosed, I really wanted to do well for them and do a lot for them. But honestly, I felt lost about what exactly I should do. But in that program, they created opportunities for mothers and children to play together. And through that, it helped me come up with ideas for things I could do with my child. I was very grateful. And at Milal Research Institute, they mainly focus on the ABA program, but they thought that integrated education would be better for my child. So they connected us to a regular kindergarten. I was grateful that they introduced us so my child could participate in integrated education. And during the first year, the support teacher accompanied us and provided support. At that time, the teacher shared a lot of information about what was happening in the kindergarten with me, and it seemed like my child was more active, which I really appreciated. But in the following year, when my child attended regular integrated classes without the support teacher, there were parts that felt overwhelming for me. And I felt like my child was a bit less engaged in kindergarten life and seemed somewhat neglected. So, although I was initially happy when they said my child would go without a support teacher, looking back now, I think if the support teacher had stayed for both years, my child could have grown even more, especially in building relationships with other children. And I also feel a bit regretful, wondering if I could have supported my child better.
Yes, my next question was actually going to be about any regrets you might have had. You've already shared your regrets all at once, even before I asked. Actually, my next question was about any regrets, but is there anything you feel you might have left out?
Now that I think about it, when we first went to the Milal Research Institute, my child cried out loud for the very first time in their life. But because we had waited so long and worked so hard to get into that program, I never thought it might have a negative impact on my child. I was just focused on calming them down. And from that point on, my child would only eat French fries and refuse to eat anything else. Later, when things got a bit better, my child would eat rice with French fries on top as a side dish. So at that time, I just believed that the program was good, that things would get better eventually, and I was completely devoted to the program, wondering why my child was acting that way. I never really thought about things from my child's perspective. But if I could go back now, I would ask myself, why is my child acting that way? I think I would have asked the research center more questions about it and tried harder to find out what my child needed from their perspective.
Yes, I understand. So, we've briefly shared your experiences with your child. Since you've raised a child with developmental disabilities and also experienced kindergarten life for 5 years, could you perhaps share some advice or helpful stories for parents who are currently raising children with developmental disabilities around the ages of 3 to 6?
The ages from 3 to 5 are a very important period. That's true for typically developing children as well as for our children. But the most important thing, both for typically developing children and for our children, is building relationships between people. In kindergarten, they teach life skills, how to communicate with other children, and basic manners that are essential for living as a person. So I think kindergarten education is extremely important. But as I mentioned earlier, I think it would have been even better if there had been a support teacher constantly present. Even now, as a kindergarten teacher, I see that it's especially difficult for our children to build relationships with other kids. So I think having a support teacher with them is important, regardless of whether the child is highly functional or lower on the spectrum. I think it would be great if a support teacher could help our children build good relationships with typically developing kids and also help them learn manners and daily habits. For example, if our child shows her like this, what do other children think? The other kids might look at them strangely and say, in that case, the support teacher could say, oh, that's a sign that he wants to play with you. They could explain it like that. And for our child, the teacher could teach them, instead of hitting, try looking at their face and guide them to use other means of communication besides physical touch. Also, I know that some parents feel upset when the support teacher goes and helps the typically developing children instead. And I can understand why they might feel that way. But if the teacher builds a good relationship with the typically developing children, then even when our child needs help, the teacher can encourage those children to help out. This way, our child gains confidence, and by forming relationships with their peers, they can learn much more effectively. Children seem to learn much more accurately and at their own level through other children. So if my child returns to kindergarten, I think I would assign a support teacher to help them actively focus on adapting well to kindergarten life And even after school, I think I would invite this support teacher to our home once or twice a week to help my child further develop and focus on the areas that need improvement from their kindergarten experience. That's where I would put my efforts.
Then do kindergartens generally welcome having a support teacher accompany a child like that? Or do they not really like it?
Well, I think that really depends on the kindergarten director. Here, they don't have separate integrated kindergartens. Most regular kindergartens accept our special kids, our children as well. So if you have a good conversation with the director in advance through an interview, I think there shouldn't be any problem with having a support teacher accompany the child.
Actually, I've heard that the period between ages 3 and 5 is the most important time for our children to interact with others and develop their social skills. But actually, when we look at parents of children with developmental disabilities, most of them tend to focus heavily on things like one-on-one cognitive education or one-on-one therapy with specialists using OT funding and similar resources. They mainly concentrate on things like OT, PT, or language therapy, and so on. But then, from an economic perspective, there are always limitations, and the budget is limited as well. So in the end, there are times when you have to make a choice, aren't there? Then, when it comes to focusing on one-on-one education with specialists versus sending a child to kindergarten and providing support there, which, as you mentioned, naturally incurs costs, it would be helpful if you could talk about the pros and cons of spending money in that way. Honestly, there are some issues with this. In cases where you receive autism funding, it's designated to be used only with certain specialists called RSPs. But if you discuss it well with BC, the support teachers you send to the kindergarten don't necessarily have to be BCs. Usually the people we refer to as BIs, if you can connect well with those BI teachers, I think it's possible. Now, as someone who has both taught in kindergarten and raised a child, which do you think is better? One-on-one instruction with specialists or seeking support within the kindergarten setting?
I think it would be really good to create an environment where a support teacher joins the kindergarten and helps provide an atmosphere where children can learn together with typically developing peers. That way, the child can get the most out of their kindergarten experience. And as our typically developing children help their peers, for example, by demonstrating things to them, they also gain a lot of confidence themselves. So from their perspective as well, I think it's really beneficial. Inclusive education is not only good for our children, but it also seems to be very effective for the typically developing kids as well. Also, as these children grow up and move on to elementary, middle, and high school, because they already feel a sense of closeness and have experience with our friends, I think they'll be able to help them much more actively and effectively when they meet them in other situations. So looking at the bigger picture, I believe it plays a very important role overall. Yes.
Yes, thank you. A little earlier, the supporter mentioned that it would be good if someone could come to the house after school once or twice a week to help out. Besides that, including your own child's experience, is there any other way to support your child after kindergarten, outside of regular hours? Is there anything you could share about that?
Yes. We also did one-on-one education after school, and we participated in group programs as well. But what our child liked the most was a program called I Love Jimmy, where he could play sports and hang out with friends his own age. But in that sports program, the kids learned to follow rules and instructions, and through exercise, they also improved their concentration. Plus, since they get to interact with typically developing children, it's great to have groups where our special kids can gather together. And it's also wonderful to have group programs where they can join in with typically developing children. I think those group exercise programs were really beneficial for the children.
Yes, yes. Hearing you say that reminds me of something. I once kept an observation journal for my child when they were about 5 or 6 years old. I read through it again recently, and I noticed that I had written down some things that I found a bit disappointing. What it was is that back then, since we were so enthusiastic during the day, our child would go to kindergarten, and even after coming home before dinner, there would be another program, and even after dinner, there were still more programs lined up. So after discussing it, we thought, hey, this is almost too much for the child. It might be exhausting them. So we decided to cancel the evening program, and I had written that down in the journal. So even now, when we think back on it, although there are a lot of good programs, we do regret that we made things too hard for the children. So rather than trying to do too much, I think it's better to do things in moderation. Is there anything else you'd like to add as a final comment?
I think we've covered everything related to this topic.
All right, so today we've talked up to kindergarten life. In conclusion, what we really want to say is that as much as possible, let's create environments where children with disabilities can interact with their typically developing peers. But since we can't just leave them on their own, should we summarize it as, let's assign support teachers who can help our children?
Yes, to maximize the effectiveness of the surrounding environment. And actually something else just came to mind that I'd like to add, because as you know, kindergartens are quite flexible. They're also small in scale. And if the kindergarten teachers are responsive, we can create a supportive environment for our children. So compared to elementary, middle or high schools, I think we can provide an environment much better suited to our kids. And if we help children build relationships from a young age, that training can continue to influence them throughout elementary, middle, and high school. So I really want to emphasize how important it is to focus support on kindergarten education. Yes.
It sounds like I'm emphasizing kindergarten a lot just because I'm a kindergarten teacher. Next time, we'll be sharing experiences from our elementary school days. Thank you for watching until now. We'll see you next time. Thank you for your hard work.
Thank you.